For our next animation, we're going to create some text that has an outline that loops around it. Let's go ahead and start with a new composition and give it a name. Leave this standard settings alone, and you can set your background to what you want. That can always be changed later. We're going to begin with a piece of text, and what you want to do is create a piece of text that's good size. So, get your font size bumped up and choose a piece of text that's pretty good size. Get it scaled up the way that you want, and choose something that has a pretty rectangular type shape. I'm using Franklin Gothic, and got this pretty big. I'm going to leave that as white, but you can make it whatever color you want. So down here in our timeline, we have a text layer, and we want to change that so that we have shapes. So we'll use this as our guide, and it can sit there, but we need shapes for the outline. So right click on your shape, and we want to go to Create and choose Create Shapes from Text. You won't see a change because what you have is you simply have two layers of the same thing, but the top one here is been created that actually is just the shape. So what we'd like to do with that is turn off its fill, so we can actually alt click on the fill and turn on its stroke, and let's bump up the thickness of the stroke so that we can see that. We do not need gradient for the stroke. So now you can see that I have two layers. One is the letter layer that I originally created, and the other one is the separate shape that I have now as just the outlines. And I can come into here and under transform, turn the opacity down a little bit of the one that's going to sit there, so I can just see that it's there, but I won't need it, and I will click on the lock for that because I don't want it to be moving around. So all the work that we're going to be doing today is going to be in this outlines layer. So expand that layer, and you can see that there are two pieces here. I have the outside shape here and the inside. And before you get started, it'd probably be a good idea to change that to say a outside and a inside to keep them straight. We're going to be animating them separately. So the first step is to simply come to here. If you click on a outside and separate that so there's some space, just go around to your points, and I'm going to do it pretty quick, but you can take your time to keep the gap pretty even as you're going through here to create some space that's around the outside. We can do the same thing to the inside and give it some space so that we can see that separated from our fill of our original letter. So the next thing we're going to be doing is animating this so it kind of chases itself around, and we do that with what's called a trim path, and we can add that under contents. Here you see this add with the triangle next to it. You see where it says trim paths. When that gets added onto here, I can expand it, and you can see that if I shrink that down, that it expands that stroke as it goes around. But you can see right now that it's chasing both of my shapes, and I don't want it to do that. I want to do it for each one. So I'm going to delete that, and instead I'm going to create a group for each of my strokes so that I can animate them individually. So go back to that add and say group, and let's call this outside, and let's move that up here, and inside of outside I want my outside layer, And let's create a second group for the inside. Let's go back. I want the group to be inside my other group. So let's go back, click on Contents, and then go to Add Group, and we'll call this Inside. And I will move that up as well. And I want my inside to be inside of inside. So if I open up outside, I have outside, and now I'm going to add to outside my trim path. So you should see this trim path is inside of outside, and if I expand that, I can control just the outside. And right now I'm just going to animate the outside so you can see how that works. So what I first want to do is scale this down so it's not full length, and I'll just put this on 10% for my end. And then going to my offset, click on my stopwatch to create a keyframe, and let's go out to 4 seconds. Now I found that in here you can put a number of times. I think 1 time per second, 1 loop per second seems about right. And how far do I want to go? Let's just say 40 degrees each time it's looping. And so now if you watch this go, it's going to keep looping around 4 times during that 4 seconds. So press space, and you can see this. You can speed that up by going more times or doing over more seconds. So that works just fine. And then what we can do, I'll collapse outside and do the same thing with inside. Click on inside and go up to Add Trim Paths. And again, let's shrink that down so it's a small piece. And maybe we want this to go at a little bit different rate. So we'll click a stopwatch on our offset, and maybe it's going to go slower, maybe 2 times. Oops. Let's go out to 4 seconds first. And maybe we want that to go 2 times. And maybe it's going to go at 30 degrees. And you can play around with those numbers as you go. That's going a lot slower inside there. It's a smaller area, and that will work out just fine. You can loop this by bringing this part down, and then if we go to our preview up here and click play, it'll loop that. Now there's a little bit of a jump there, and we can play around with the numbers so it doesn't have that hiccup. But that's the basic idea of doing the outline.